Hey everyone, Steven here, and welcome to my little library of horrors. So, usually when I think of splatterpunk in the most extreme cases, as far as books that I've read, and usually the typical names that come to mind are, The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum, or Let's Go Play at the Adams by Mendel W. Johnson, or even going a little more modern, Survivor by J.F. Gonzalez. Um, as I said, those are usually kind of like the top three contenders that sort of bubble to my mind when people ask me what's the most extreme thing you've ever read. Um, However, I have now found a new contender, and that is the Sweetwater Point Motel by Peter Sabb. So this was originally published in 1981. The story of the Sweetwater Point Motel is about these three English women. It's an older English woman and her two daughters. It's Edith, her oldest daughter, who I think is 17, which is Abigail, and her youngest daughter, who is 12, which is, her name is Katie. They're visiting America to visit some of Edith's cousin, Andy, and also to, I guess, do a little bit of sightseeing. Abigail had been doing a project on this American colony that suddenly disappeared, and she wanted to visit, where their last known location was and stuff like that. But they suddenly go missing, and when that happens, obviously that's how the story that's kind of the basis of the story. So the story starts out with us being introduced to our protagonist, Philip Burrows. He is in England. He is it's hard to explain. So it doesn't really matter. I don't want to get too into the complications of their relationship. But anyway, when Andy calls Philip and lets him know that, the girls should have arrived at his house days ago and he hasn't heard any sign from them, Philip is quick to take a trip over to America and start investigating what happened to them. And the beginning of the story is very... It's honestly, it's not great. It almost feels like this is the author's first published works. I'm not really sure if it is, but it certainly feels like it. It's got a lot of unnecessary things happening in the beginning. He ends up at a bar and talking to an escort, which is where he sort of gets his first clue as to what's, where to start looking. And, it's basically like he ends up sleeping with the escort and stopping at like this seedy porn shop and picking up like this really like nasty magazine. And it's supposed to be kind of like, these seeds of foretelling about what's in store for you as a reader later in the story. But it really feels just kind of unnecessary, to be totally honest. It feels confusing, and it's like, you know what I mean? Like, you're here looking for your missing family, but the first thing you do is sleep with an escort? It just seems kind of weird, like, why? And that's genuinely, like, the first 70 pages of the book is, like, sort of him fumbling around trying to figure out what to do and where to go. And, as the more I sat on the story after I finished it, I can kind of appreciate, like, this is actually how it would be in real life. You don't really know where to start, where to go, so you're kind of just taking a random shot in the dark. However, I also just can't, me personally, like, I don't think sleeping with someone's going to be the forethought of my mind when there's three missing people I'm here to find. So So yeah, like I said, it was the first 70 pages of the book, and it got to a point where I was just like, man, is anything gonna happen at this point? I'm like, I'm getting kind of bored now. Well, be careful what you wish for. Because 2 pages later is when we are now introduced to our antagonists of the story. A trio of James, Candace, and Tommy. So, James and Candace are sort of our true antagonists to this story. They're sort of this psychotic Bonnie and Clyde duo. Not so much a couple, but they're clearly not good people. They are starting off, doing drugs. That's how we're introduced to them. And their conversations revolve around a lot about the factor of evil. And, there's this really chilling line that Candace says where both of them actually have a really chilling line where it's James says, in this world, they're talking about Tommy as a matter of fact, because Tommy is sort of the slow, he's definitely slower, so they kind of tease him and use him, I guess, sort of like entertainment to them. But James kind of says, in this world, some people do things and some people have things done to them. And it's this really chilling line that really solidifies his personality and the kind of mindset that he has. Where Candace very, very, replies very shortly after that, there seems to be a dwindling supply of innocence in the world, and evil's no fun if your victim is evil too. And again, it's just a really chilling line that sort of solidifies the mentality and personality they both have. And again, sort of prepares you for what's in store to come in the story. And so very shortly after that, we see what happens to Edith and the girls and how they end up in the predicament they end up in. They are driving during a bad storm. The car crashes. And 5 minutes later, that's when James and Candace and Tommy happen to see their car on the side of the road and rescue them and bring them to, I think James's father or his uncle owns the Sweetwater Point Motel, which is closed during January. Where they live is very rural and isn't busy during the winter seasons. So, they bring the girls back to the hotel, and Edith thinks how lucky they are and how fortunate it was that these people came across them and essentially rescued them. But Edith very quickly comes to realize that their salvation is actually going to become their hell, and things very quickly unfold, and it is quite frankly very disturbing. I won't say it gets to the upper echelons of, The Girl Next Door or Let's Go Play at the Adams. I would honestly equate it more to the subtle intensity of Survivor by J.F. Gonzalez, where a lot of the terror and horrifying things that happen are implied rather than flat out described to us. So, the author does a wonderful job of I think that's really where his writing shined, is when it feels like when he is in the perspective of Philip Burrows, he doesn't really know how to handle sort of the basic quote unquote unexciting parts of telling a story, where the action isn't happening. Wherein, as we get the scenes, where he comes into the perspective of Edith or James or Candace, and that's where he really shines. He really knows how to just pull at the heartstrings of a reader and really make you dread and get the heart racing, because it's like he doesn't just dive right into what's going to happen, like, but it also happens quick, you know what I mean? But it there's definitely this build up to it where it's like you're just like, is he going to do it? Is he going to go there? Is this going to happen? What's going to happen? You know, James and Candace and Tommy are all incredibly unpredictable, and that's what makes the story exciting and terrifying. So, you know, there's a lot of scenes where like there's this one scene where you know, they keep the girls separated in the separate rooms and everything, and after a few days they decide to hold this dinner party essentially, and this is the first time all of the girls have seen each other in a couple of days. You know, they don't know who's alive, who's dead, what's happened. And, you know, they all rush to greet each other, and quickly, you know, the antagonists are quick to pull that apart. And it's like, it's this very intense, disturbing dinner scene where, like, again, I don't want to give too much detail, but it genuinely physically made me angry, like white knuckled the pages, shaking, angry at these characters, which I think is brilliant writing. That's what you want out of your antagonists, especially in a story like this. You want to hate these people, and he makes you do that. Like, for lack of a better word, James is a bastard. He is an absolute bastard of a character, and I would easily put him up there with probably one of the most vile and disgusting antagonists I've ever come across in a book. Like, he is awful and gross and just such a narcissistic bastard. And he knows it too. That's the thing. That's the thing that really pisses me off about him, is he knows it. And he doesn't shy away from shoving it in your face. And that's what makes me hate him. But that's, again, like I said, that's what makes him a fantastic character. Where Candace is sort of more of the level-headed, if you could say that, sort of the level-headed, sort of the yin to James's yang, essentially. Like, she makes sure nothing goes too overboard, according to her. Which, I mean, until you start to delve more into her character, I can't say she may be more evil than James is, but she could probably give him a run for his money. And so it, like I said, it's just this really great scene. And then again we jump back to Philip, and you know, it does get better. Like I think, like, the author seems to kind of find his footing with Philip as the story starts to go on. A little bit. You know, Philip meets this woman at a diner. They end up developing this sort of romantic relationship, which, again, it just seems kind of odd to me, given the circumstances of why Philip is there in the first place. And that, you know, again, there's this random scene where he's in this town, and you know, he goes to this place where they share. It's weird. Like I said, it feels so weird to the story, that it feels so disconnected to what should actually be going on. Like, I feel like the author wanted to inject some excitement into the unexciting parts, where I feel like he should have just kind of stuck with the more unexcitingness of that part of the story, where it's like, but again, as I said, he seems to find his footing by sort of like, so we kind of get more, Philip keeps in contact with Andy throughout the story, and we start to see how, you know, the disappearance of Edith and the girls not only affects Philip, but how a missing person case sort of spider webs into affecting a lot of people's lives. You know, it turns out that Andy was having an affair with someone at his work and now has left his wife and things like that. So, like, Philip is talking to his wife, and his wife almost sort of blames Philip for Andy leaving and having this whole thing happen in the first place. So, excuse me. I think it was really interesting and fascinating to see the author sort of incorporate that realness into the story, that, a missing person's case doesn't just affect the immediate family. It can affect a lot of other people involved. So, and we start to see how Philip gets more clues, starts to piece things together, and that's when it starts to become exciting. And I think, like I said, the author sort of seems to realize that as well, where he's like, aha, okay, now I can see where I can keep my readers interested without the unnecessary, like, sort of, like I said, completely useless, sex scenes and visiting a pornography shop and stuff like that, like, just to sort of be raunchy for the sake of keeping interest. This is where I'm starting to be more interested in Philip's side of the story. So the climax, oh man, the climax is like, the book's only about 282 pages, but man, the last 100 pages of this book is just crazy intense. Not even the last 100 pages. Like, as we're getting down to the last 50 pages of the book, it is just like, oh my God, what is going to happen? Like, oh my God, it's heartbreaking. It's shocking. There's like I said, it's just like, I was literally like, like, shaking every time I picked up this book to continue reading the climax. It was just like, I had to put it down a couple times and just kind of catch my breath, because I wasn't able to comprehend what I was reading, because my mind was still reeling about a freaking 3 sentences ago. So, it was just awesome. Like, I loved the climax of the story. Absolutely loved it. Like I said, it's very emotional, very heartbreaking. You don't know what's going to happen. It's so crazy. So crazy. I enjoyed the ending. Again, I don't want to say how it ends. Obviously, I won't say how it ends, but I won't. I also won't go into detail if it's a happy or a sad ending. But we're talking about, we're in the realm of Jack Ketchum here, so take that as you will. But I also want to say, it's not a 1-for-1 kind of Ketchum story, so take that as you will. But I think one of the really important aspects that this story, I think, sort of makes the reader internalize is, I won't spoil whether there is a revenge aspect of this story or not. I feel like that's going to completely spoil it, so I won't say if there is that kind of aspect in the story or not. But what I found was, obviously the acts these people do in this book are horrendous and despicable and unspeakable, and, they have everything they have coming to them, if and when that happens. But it feels like it made me kind of sort of reflect on myself as a human being. As I was reading the story, I want that revenge aspect. I wanted James and Candace and Tommy to suffer. I wanted them to feel every ounce of pain and hopelessness that they inflicted on Edith and the girls. And, the more that, and I guess it just kind of made me wonder, does that make me any better than them? not that it's not that I would revel in the act of it. It kind of makes me it's that feeling of, you know, getting back control over someone who had taken it away from you. You know, I think it kind of links back to a lot of the trauma that I felt as a child. And, you know, I don't know, I guess it kind of just made me think, you know, am I better than them? If that's really what I want in this story, does that genuinely make me a better person than James or Candace or Tommy? But I also guess ultimately, you know, it kind of makes me think of a quote from A Boy and His Dog at the End of the World by C.A. Fletcher. And it says, you know, I'm not a bad person, but I'm not a particularly great person either. I'm just good enough. And I guess that just makes me human. But yeah, so overall, I'm going to go ahead and say 4 out of 5. I was really set on giving it a 3.5 out of 5, but it really is one of those books that the last 100 pages really ramped it up and really brought it to life. And it definitely made it a book that I will absolutely never forget that I read, but it's also going to be in the Hall of Fame of books that I enjoyed, but will never ever read again or recommend to someone as a normal recommendation, I guess. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today, everyone. I really appreciate you watching. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. If you haven't, thank you anyway for giving me a little bit of your time today. I apologize, it's been a little while since I've uploaded. I guess I've just been feeling really depressed lately, and I'll be honest, it doesn't feel like it's getting any better soon, so, you know, even just doing this took a lot of energy. I almost didn't, but, you know, I'm happy I did. It did make me feel a little better. But, you know, I guess I'm just trying. But until next time, everyone, be kind to yourselves. Later.